Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. I am your host, Joe Muzzilla. It is good to be with you as I record this on the 9th of April. Well, I'm not going to go into where I've been. Lots going on. But anyways, I'm honored. I have a wonderful guest with me today, and I'm very honored to have her on. This is Dr. Kori Novak, and I'm going to read from her website here. As a renowned researcher, published author, and noted expert, Dr. Kori Novak is helping change the narrative around prison hospice and aging. Her deeply held passion for topics others would prefer to ignore, in part fueled by her own deeply personal experience, is driving both conversation and action to ensure that no one dies alone. Dr. Novak's unique expertise in oh my goodness, I knew I was going to say this wrong. I've been practicing it. Gerontology, thank you. Oh, I was practicing earlier. I knew I was going to hit that word, and my mouth was not going to cooperate. Combined with a broad range of executive-level experience in elder care, hospice services, and healthcare strategy, has positioned her as an internationally sought-after expert and lecturer in places such as Oxford University, University of Suffolk, the University of Budapest, Lisbon University, the University of Vienna, and the University of Cardiff in Wales. In addition, she is often asked to speak at various international healthcare and correctional conferences in Asia, Australia, and Central Europe. Dr. Novak has been a guest elder care and present expert on various NPR and radio programs, as well as on Dr. Oz and other television programs. So, with that, welcome and thank you, Miss, is it Miss or Mrs.? Miss Dr. Kori Novak, welcome to the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I always love to chat with people who never have really thought about prison hospice or never really thought about people dying in prison. It's great to be able to share my passion with your listeners.
I'm grateful you're here. Yeah, this was something I don't believe in chance, and I still don't have a full memory of how I came across. I believe in divine intervention, if you will. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that it happened. I had followed you on I think it's Instagram, and was watching. I just watch for a little while before I do anything normally, and was watching your posts and seemed very, very intriguing, and thought I would reach out. I think you had posted on there that you'd be interested in doing working with others and doing podcasts or coming on to somebody's podcast. So I thought, well, what a perfect way. And so here we are. So I guess, first question is, was this something instilled in you as a child, and what got you on this path?
As a child, my parents did a marvelous job instilling in me caring for other people. So it didn't really matter who you were, where you were from, what your background was. I watched my parents live what they taught, which was you care for other people and you don't question, you just give. And so in that way, it was very much how I grew up. It wasn't just something they taught me, it's something we lived. And I watched them do that through business, through religion, through the faith I was brought up in, through just really everyday life. And so that was, like I said, I wouldn't even say I was taught it. It's just how we lived. And it's just something I did. So as I kind of came into my own through school and through, just growing up, I always rooted for the underdog. that was always very important to me. It was something that, again, I watched my family do, and always caring for that person that maybe wasn't as blessed or lucky as we were or as others were, and meeting them where they were and giving them what they need, and not what we thought they needed, but what they truly needed or what they thought they needed. And so when I started kind of honing my career and what I wanted to do when I grew up, I was going down that path. And then I was about 25, and then my dad got sick. And he was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, which is bile duct cancer, which is still very rare, but then it was even more rare. And he was just given 2 weeks to live. And they told him, we suggest hospice. And so I flew home. I was living in California. I flew back to Colorado, and I decided to take care of him. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I was adopted when I was 3 months old. And so there's a pretty good sized gap between me and the next siblings up from me. And so they all had families, and they had families they had to care for. And there's nothing, I never had an issue with that, but it seemed to fall on me to care for my dad. My mom was there, but she was losing her husband of 47 years, and she was just a mess. She was mourning. She was frightened. So I stepped in, and I learned the value and the power of hospice very early on. And so my dad passed, and after he passed, I was actually just finishing my MBA. And as I was finishing my MBA, he passed. I graduated about 6 months later because I had to put everything on hold. And I realized that general business management, that kind of thing, wasn't necessarily what I wanted. So I decided to go on and get my PhD. I was working still, so I worked while I did my PhD. And I really focused on hospice because it had made such a big impact on me. So I was living in Northern California at the time, or actually San Francisco area, and going to, everybody that came to visit always wanted to go to Alcatraz. So I'd been to Alcatraz 1,000,000+ times, and I was always looking for something new. Growing up, I always had a deep, I don't know if I'd say desire or a deep care for older folks. And I didn't know what gerontology was. And for those of you that may not know what it is the study of aging. It's the social science study of aging. Like geriatrics in medicine, gerontology is how we age and the aspects, the non-physical aspects around it. And so as I didn't know what that was growing up, but I knew that I loved working with elderly people. So one of the things that when I was going to Alcatraz all the time, one of the things that I saw was a kind of a vignette that said prisoners of age in the basement of Alcatraz. And I thought, well, first of all, the basement of Alcatraz, how cool is that? And second of all, it's old people. I love that. So I went down there and saw these photos and these vignettes of these aging inmates. And I thought probably what everybody thinks when they start hearing me talk, which is, I've never thought about old inmates. And something sparked in me about hospice and dying alone, and how horrible it would be to die alone in prison. And that became my dissertation, and that became my passion and my research. And that's what I started doing. I started researching hospice in prison facilities, and there aren't many. There's only about maybe 100 or so in the country, and when you consider how many prisons we have, that's not much. And it's not something that a lot of people think about or care about, because they think often people think, who cares? They're inmates. They're in prison for a reason. They did something awful, especially if they're there for life and they're going to die a natural death in prison. They did something bad. And people are absolutely right. A lot of these people did horrible things that none of us would ever even consider doing in our wildest dreams. But I also ask people, are you the same person that you were when you were 20 or 30 or even 40? We all change. And I used to say I would guess, but now I've actually been in the prisons, I've done the research, and I know that there are bad people in prison. Make no mistake. There are bad people, there are sick people, there are awful people. But every single person in prison is not sick, bad, or awful. There are people who committed heinous crimes when they were high or when they were sick or they're mentally ill. And now that they've stabilized, they're not horrible people. There are people in there that are sorry for their crimes. And so what I learned very quickly is if I can give grace to my neighbor who, accidentally threw a ball into my house and broke my window, they didn't mean that. So it's easy to give them to give them that grace and to say it's okay. It's a lot harder when you feel like somebody's done something purposefully or maliciously. But if they did it when they were 20, would they still do it when they're 40? Most people would say no. And so I looked at these people who were dying in prison, and many of them that I met were not their crime. They admit they did something awful, but they were different people, just like we are on the outside. So do they deserve to die alone? I would say no. I will put out the caveat that I have not been the victim of a violent crime, thankfully, nor has anybody that I love, thankfully. But I believe there are circumstances around everything. And before we judge, we need to understand those circumstances. And so I really got into prison hospice. I got into caring for those that people have forgotten and caring for those who people have thrown away. And one of the interesting things my research brought out was that one of the biggest fears people have when they enter the prison system, and this is not jail, this is actual prison, is not being shanked or raped or murdered or anything like that. The biggest true fear that my research has shown in all the prisons I've been in is the stigma of dying alone in prison. And if we can take that stigma away, if we can take that fear of dying alone, I have seen miraculous things happen to the culture of a prison. Things that are not only humanitarian-wise amazing, but for those of you who may be listening saying, I don't want to hear about prisoners, I don't care about prisoners, you should, because your tax money goes to their health care. And the things that I talk about and the hospices in prisons can actually save taxpayer money. So even if you hate the prisoners and you don't care if they die alone, you should hear what I'm saying, because I can save you money. I can save your state money. And that's something that most people do care about. So there's so many great things to this thing I'm so passionate about, whether it's on a humanitarian level or on a financial level. And that's a very, very long answer to how I got into this and why I'm so passionate about it. It was really out of losing my own father, and then later I lost